much for joining us because you are so busy with your all your work and you are able to find some time before going to US back to share your thoughts with us. Thank you so much, and we welcome you to our today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pillai, for great introduction and great welcome. I am highly privileged to do so, and it's a great opportunity for me to share my experiences across, startups and enterprises. And I guess, you guys did phenomenal job of introducing me, so I need to say no more. But just to add that I actually worked on some of the early pioneering software startups going back to the 1990s with crypto technologies, bringing in the very first PC SQL database. It was a first startup coming out of Oracle Corporation. From there, I had the opportunity to join Microsoft SQL Server product launch, and ended up actually spending 20 years spanning across the globe from London, France, Seattle to Denmark, and managing the Indian operations in Hyderabad and then back into Seattle. And for the last few years, I've been working on our own startup together with my co-founders. As you mentioned, building a cloud-based object platform with integrated artificial intelligence machine learning pipeline with our own patented algorithms. So today, what I'm going to focus on is essentially providing a very brief overview of software development lifecycle and various approaches. As people generally know, waterfall model or agile methodologies. And I'll share some of my experiences in how we have built products and how I see successful products being built. From then on, I'll talk about some of the typical challenges that one faces when building products. And moving on to, I'll talk about, and actually more than talk about, showcase, how artificial intelligence can bring together some of the rather solve some of the challenges one faces when managing project managements these days, when you have multiple channels of communications, be it email, be it text messages, be it chat platforms such as Microsoft Teams. In fact, that's what we are using today, or Slack messages for that matter, and how we can marry all those communications into one in the context of tasks at hand. And from then on, I'll summarize my presentation today with lessons learned and open the forum for Q&A. That said, let's move on. So in software engineering lifecycle, we have talked about, or rather, we have worked on waterfall model as well as agile methodologies. So the diagram on the right shows essentially both approaches. In waterfall, we have, focus on the scope. So that is, the project is managed scope by scope. Each milestone has a defined scope, and we are trying to, essentially desperately trying to meet the scope. And as a result, your timelines changes, or you have to, bring in more resources to meet that particular scope. The agile methodologies essentially inverts that model. So you have a finite time frame, and typically we call them sprints. So it could be 2-week sprint, or fortnightly, or a monthly sprints. You have a finite work items, and you are going through these scrums, which is essentially your daily meetings where you're just trying to come up and make sure the work is making progress and you are trying to finish those tasks. And any leftover work essentially gets rolled over into the next or gets triaged. So these are two approaches that have been traditionally tried. Off late though, people have been using, and you can look it up online. There is a lot of already blogs written about this, and we ourselves at our product are using this, and this is essentially a hybrid approach. So it's trying to circumvent some of the challenges in both these approaches. So in waterfall, as one notices, you have scope creep, you have timelines, which continues to change, conversely, in agile methodologies, you have challenges of essentially working on these, small incremental tasks and moving away from your, North Pole or your North Star or your MVP, because your task essentially take over what your deliverable was. And you may not have actually a product ready at any given time to be able to showcase what you are building on. So with hybrid approaches, what happens is essentially there is a focus on scope. So your deliverable is in focus, but you bring in the best of agile approaches, essentially, narrowing down really each milestone focus, breaking it down into manageable sprints. So you take the agile approach and you make sure the scope remains in focus, and you make incremental progress, but building the product as per what your end goal is. Now let's look at, what overall engineering cycle is about. And, there are a lot of different phases, but in the interest of simplicity, I've kind of grouped them in three major areas. One is essentially all around planning, analysis, and design. The second is the actual, when you are in brass tacks or when you are actually implementation. So that is your developing software, you're testing it, you're integrating it, and that's your major focus towards in the entire software lifecycle. And the last phase is essentially releasing the product, maintaining it, and essentially planning the next release. Right. So these are three major areas of software development lifecycle. And instead of going into every single bullet, I'm going to focus on what I have found to be of most value for each phase. So when it comes to planning, in the old days, we would have these documents called MRDs or PRDs. These are essentially, market requirement document, or, your product requirement document. But these days, you talk about MVP, what is your minimal viable product? And essentially, or you talk about your elevator pitch, all of these are essentially nothing but, what your laser focus is when it comes to what you're building. So it doesn't have to be, a 50-page document, 30-page document, but it has to be something that brings the team together, that is the product you're building, and that is the minimum feature set that you have, and that is what the market needs, and that is what the customer is willing to pay for. These are all the questions that you must answer as part of your, your document, whether it's, 50 pages, 10 pages, or, 5 lines. Next thing that I really want to stress upon is essentially, as part of planning, don't leave out storyboarding or, user interface, user interaction, or getting some early customer feedback. And, it really pays dividends down the line. And why I talk about this is, there is a 80-20 rule, or a hakams razor. You might, have heard about this. Essentially, you have to focus on what user really wants to do on day-to-day basis, and that will essentially is the 80% of the product should focus on solving those problems 100%. So majority of your feature set should be about looking at specific user problems, and they should be solved 100%. Let me take an example. For example, I look at here while I'm in India. You have this is GeoMart, or you have Amazon. They are delivering. And it's essentially leaving out your small vendors. Across the store. You have deli stores. You have kirana stores. Now, if you were to think about, here is the government of India trying to come up with, open commerce platform, and there is an opportunity for one to come in and provide these small retailers to have their inventory available through this open platform, and have a client experience where you can provide same level of delivery at home experience using tying up with one of these delivery vendors, which is I think Zomato, or one of those vendors out there, or even Ola for that matter. So again, I'm just hypothecating the scenario. Very likely somebody may pick it up someday. But if you think about it, there are so many challenges when it comes to a vendor to be able to display their inventory, and whether that vendor is actually close to the buyer, you know, whether that buyer can have an experience to be able to find that inventory that they are looking for among thousands of vendors who would be potentially displaying their wares on this platform. So again, the value of building a scenario end to end, that, hey, I'm a housewife, I want this product, delivered in next 2 hours from my local kirana store. Can you build a user experience around that? How that person can find that product, order that product, pay for it, get it delivered, and if there is a return, can process that return, or even, can have the product for display and have it returned, without any charge. All of those things, as part of, building your story, getting some early feedback from your clients, and they'll pay a lot of dividends down the road. Now let's talk about, when it comes to actual brass tacks, which is essentially you're writing code, you're testing it, you're integrating it. Again, one thing I'll stress is I have seen the value of documentation, whether these are, design documents, whether these are test cases, make sure that your team works together to come to an agreement with what they write, even a single line of code. And again, and this does not have to be an IEEE spec, functional spec that could essentially be pages and pages. You don't want to bog down your team to come to a consensus by actually having them to review the document, for days and end. It could be just, a simple bullet list of 10 items that this feature must do. This is how you're going to test it. This is how you're going to build it. But make sure, all your team members are in agreement, before you actually start writing code. When you're writing the code, another very important piece, and I've seen this time and again, and essentially this is one of the areas I think, in India, software development houses have to do a, much better job, and probably they are already doing today, is functional tests. So that is, don't just write the code and assume it's, correct by, definition, or correct because it's compiled. Uh, Tie them back to the very scenarios I was talking about. Make sure there are unit tests, functional tests that your code goes through, and you take that onus upon yourself as a software developer to write those unit tests. So the goal should be, that you have a very good code coverage. Of course, the ideal case be 100% code coverage. That is to say, every single line of code that you're writing is actually getting tested by your automated functional test. But short of that, what I highly encourage is, as you are building software, if you find bugs, each bug, make sure don't you just fix the bugs, but also write an automated test case for that particular bug. Because what that does is ensures that code quality and stability improves over time. As you write more and more code quality improves. Similarly, there is this whole continuous integration, continuous delivery or deployment approach now, CI/CD. This is another new methodology as part of software development lifecycle. In the past, developers will write the code, testers would test it, and then a build will come out, some days later or weeks later. Now, with CI/CD, there is, as soon as a nightly build, and all changes that a developer has written as part of the code, or a tester has written as part of their automation tests, gets picked up every night. And so essentially there is a main branch that is always bug free. Developers and testers must merge, their local changes after they have tested them individually into the main branch. And when the build happens, three things could happen. The build itself breaks because some of the components, two developers might have chosen components with different versions that are incompatible with each other, and the build can't be done. Or the second thing, the build breaks because a test breaks, even though the developers have tested them individually, but together in the integrated build, some tests break. Or, of course, the happy path is the build works, it tests successfully, and people can download and work with it. These build break bugs should be the highest priority, so that developers, testers whose code have caused the build break, they should drop everything, fix it right away. And of course, there are all of those security, performance, scale, and stress tests that one should do continually. Have very documented set of goals, deliverables. If it's a web scale product, make sure you have metrics to test for number of users, number of nodes. If it's scale out scenario, make sure that individual node can support a certain amount of load, whether it's amount of memory, amount of disk space. All of those should be documented, and you should have tests to have a stress test to to make sure your software or the service is, able to take that load from the start, because making those changes would be much harder at a later stage. Lastly, when it comes to release, maintenance, and planning, the stress that I would make is essentially involving the customer early on. And we ourselves have seen tremendous benefits of doing that. So make sure you have proof of concept available. You dog food the product yourself. You make sure you are using the product yourself. I mean, we are building, for example, task management software. We have been using it ourselves, and it has been painful, very, very painful at times, but it has given us, a good insight into what our customers would face, and that helps us actually improve the quality. This has been true when I was working on Windows products. We were using early builds of Windows from day one. I have some anecdotes that I'll say for the end. When I was working for Bill Gates personally, I installed some of the very early builds of Windows 95 on his only laptop. That was also one of the cutting edge laptops, and this is going back to 1995. So I'll talk about this later. Let me get through the content here. Now, what are the typical challenges one faces? Of course, there is a constant struggle between features we want to build versus resources we have at hand. And one of the best sayings I heard from one of my release managers at Microsoft, this was actually while we were building Windows XP. He mentioned, shipping is a feature. Shipping is a term we have used quite often during Microsoft product days, and I think we continue to use. This is essentially when the product is handed over, it's released. It released to manufacturing. We used to call it RTM because it used to be actually printed on disks. Then it's released because it's now released online on the cloud. But internally we call it shipping. So that is shipped out of the door. So it itself is a feature. No matter how many features you want to build in the product, until unless product goes out of the door, actually a real customer is using it on a day-to-day basis, it's not complete, because you don't know what the end result is until unless customer has tasted it. So it itself, as a project management, you have to realize and internalize that shipping is a feature. So you have to be ruthless when it comes to finding the right balance between nice to have, must have, and add it if time. So that's typical triage. You got to always have laser focus on what is must-have feature. Another, I guess, anecdote I'll share is, another release manager, his best quip was, that the best service he has performed at Microsoft is actually by cutting his features, not shipping his features. That is, it's like having a self-sacrifice, having the courage to, let go of your pet features is very, very important, and often the right call. Again, there are plethora of issues that may come up. You may have late breaking changes, requirements. You may have design constraints. You have made some incorrect assumptions. Of course, the user is giving you feedback. Let me touch upon, these are, of course, very hard facts that you have to accommodate for, but don't overlook some of these soft facts that come into play. And one of them is actually team culture and dynamics. And you as a project manager has to have an eye for that, especially, when I had to work across geographical boundaries and cultural boundaries, living in Denmark, working with a team in India and working in a team in the US, all three teams have very, very different cultures, team in India, again, I'm overly generalizing here, but there is a tendency to overcommit. They don't want to be, seen as second to none, and accepting everything is part of that pride, even to a fault. Team in Denmark, everything must be a team effort, therefore everybody must be consulted. Team in America, it's a New York Yankee culture, or we call it cowboy culture. Who is on the phone, who is on the conference, makes the decision, makes the call. So you got to really make sure that it is indeed the call that you want to follow. So these are, some of those very generalized, things that I've mentioned, but you, as when you're working in, you have to have an eye for these cultural differences, and make sure you are actually accounting for those when you're actually building the projects together. And also, very, very importantly, and this is where I lead into, what we are addressing some of these things in our product, is that often, as a project manager, program manager, you are focused on, essentially using tools and processes to get the job done. But remember, those tools and processes are only a means to an end. The engineering team, the deliverables are the focus, they are the end goal, so uh, tools and processes should not become the focus, they should not become a hindrance. At any time that happens, you should have the third eye, to be able to make sure that do what's necessary to bring the focus back on the deliverables themselves. Now let's focus on how AI plays a role in, and essentially this is my take or our team's insight into how we are bringing AI into project management. Of course, this is a relatively new field, so there is a lot of green field, blue sky approaches, and we are taking some of the approaches ourselves. I'm going to get back to this slide, after I show you what we have done in this space. And so I'm going to switch into a little bit of a product demo mode here. This is essentially our product. In fact, this is right hot off the press. We are in RC mode right now. And of course, at the end of the presentation, I'll leave my deck as well as, my credentials to be shared. And all of you who are attending, you are welcome to reach out to me. We will provide you a sign up, for free for at least next 6 months or so. That's our goal, to get as many deployments as out there. So that's my plug here. But let's see what we are doing. So initially, as I mentioned, let the focus be on deliverables and the actual work, not on the process. So our focus is on ease of use, and I'm going to show you some of the things that we are doing in this space. This is actually a real scenario. This is, one of our, as I mentioned, involve your customer early. We have a project management manager working with us who manages, construction projects in Seattle, and she's very highly experienced, in the area of real estate management as well as mining industry, and has managed projects of very many scales. And today she's managing about 18 projects, some of them using our software. And this is one of those projects. This is about essentially building a single family residence. And in Seattle, one has to go through. I know the process is very similar in India, but many of these steps get, of course, sidelined, or but not so, unfortunately, in Seattle. So you have to take the project through zoning review, through site plan, through structural engineering, through civil engineering, through geotech, and have the city of Seattle review each of the steps through their engineers, and you get corrections back, and and then eventually you get a permit. And believe it or not, it could take up to a year to 18 months to get a permit before you can actually break ground and start building something. So needless to say, if she's managing multiple projects, she can't really manage it through just emails and phone calls. So having a project management software that actually facilitates that is fairly handy. This is one of those projects. Now, if she were to do the same thing and enter tasks for each project manually, that would be a very cumbersome process. So what we have provided is something called a template to create new projects. So for example, she can create a new project using an existing template. And template is nothing but a list of tasks, milestones, and attributes all packaged together that she can just start with without having to actually enter that data manually, and then she can go ahead and easily customize that. So that's just as simple as to create a new project. But how one creates a template? Actually, that's actually pretty simple. So imagine she had a project, which is this project that we'll be looking at. But in the project itself, if you notice on the right side, we actually allow the project to be exported as a template. So at any time, you can select whatever you have in the project, and you can export it as a template. That template allows you to select all the existing tasks, or you can selectively select some of the tasks, and we will automatically pick up any related milestones, labels, and package it all together as a template that then can be loaded as a new project. Now let's look at the project itself. At any given time, we provide you the summary view, and this is called a card view. I'll show you. We have different types of views, and then within the project itself, when you're looking at the task view for all the tasks, notice the bar. We allow easily, reordering, rearranging of the task by simple click. In this case, for example, you can make a task as a child task. And this is some of the direct feedback we got from Robin, because she likes to be able to provide an overview of the project to their clients, and they're very difficult to do that in existing products. So we provide, for example, Gantt charts and chart views. So it's very easy to look at Gantt chart that most projects do. But here also we provide a chart view. Now, this is something that Robin wants to be able to provide a visually presentation of, okay, these are the steps a project is going to go through, and she can just take that, send it to the client that's, hey, this is where they are. And then we can actually show where exactly the project is at a current state. Another big thing that we have done is essentially allowed Robin to very easily create filters. Now, there are tons of filter creation query builder tools available, but they're too complex for anybody to use, or they are too simplistic. In this case, for example, we allow Robin to very easily look for all the tasks related to two particular milestones. So we have one milestone, which is essentially site prep, and another milestone where she needs to be looking at site release. So the second milestone is essentially site release, and we allow the expression to be A or B. And it's very simple for now, Robin, to see the results for both the criteria there. Not only that, we actually allow the filters that are currently applied that you can easily remove, and you can also save them. So these filters can be saved, and you see that 0 active, pending, 10 completed, confidential, or even our project dashboard. These are all nothing but saved queries. So we allow any project manager to very easily create dashboards out of these saved queries, and that's one of the features that is very handy when you want to look at the Kanban board or any of those Agile Scrum based summary dashboards. Now, actually, I want to now jump into the role of AI. But before we go there, let's see how easy it is to create or update a task. So this is one particular task. Robin needs to get this particular tree removed from the site, and she's going to assign this to a tree service person. Now, in order to do that, she's going to edit the task. Now notice, in order for her to do that, she actually wants to make the task is like this is a very important, severity 1 task. But there's no such label for doing that. But we allow Robin to actually ad hoc create new labels. So she can very easily create a label called severity, and she can give it different options. S1, S2, S3. We actually allow labels to be either single value, multi-value, or simple tag, or even allow a user to provide some input for that value. So these are some customizations that in your project management software today, if you were to do that, you will have to go into the schema, modify the schema, create these new attributes, then apply it to a project, and then they will be available across all different tasks that you have. We allow that to be created ad hoc as and when needed. This is one big nifty feature that is unique that we are offering. Similarly, we allow now again you can assign very easily a contact. So this is Robin just created a new contact, Zach Uribe, and Zach is at treeservices.com. Now by simply assigning that task, what happens is one key feature is Zach actually is not our project management user. He's simply a contact. So Zach is actually going to get an email, not this particular project. So Robin is actually going to attach very simply a permit, and permit is attached. Robin had written a little email. Hey, Zach, can you take care of this? Now this task gets assigned. Before we go over, another feature I wanted to show here is essentially how easy it is to create certain dependencies. So there are the two tasks. We have the site extraction and the tree removal. The tree removal has to happen before site extraction. So we set up very easily a finish start dependency there. That's done. Now I'm going to switch over, to Zach's email. Remember, Zach doesn't have this access to the portal. They just get an email. And we in the background actually have our email notification workflow. So it can pick up the task, it can convert into an email, send it to email address. And this email, when Zach opens, it actually is coming from us. This is basically our assistant, and it basically provides the same comment that Robin wrote in the task. And it also provides the one-click access to the task that Zach, if he wanted to open it and look at the permit. Now, Zach can actually provide a response that, hey, Zobin, I can get it done for this money. I can only start after 3 days, and it'll take me 4 days, etc. This email goes back to Robin, but before it goes back to Robin, actually, while it's going back to the Robin, it also comes to our notification sync in the background. We have a host that is actually listening to the email because it went through that assistant, and it can process. It applies our the natural language processing and intent mining algorithms to this. It can see that this task is actually going to be starting 3 days later, and its duration is only 4 days. So it will actually generate a notification directly for Robin. And if you look at this notification, it's actually converted already into a pending task change. That is, from email, we convert into a task change. And this is the power of AI that I talked about, how you can capture the communications that are happening in chat messages and email. Our message sync is actually universal. It can apply to, we use matrix protocol, so it could be chat messages or it could be emails coming over through mail gateways, and we convert them into pending task. But what happens next is essentially, remember we said the dependencies, because this task is starting a little late, we actually have a dependency engine working behind as well that is essentially triggered automatically whenever any task is being updated, and it'll check for all dependencies, and we allow the tasks to be updated only when the dependencies are met. This is another area where AI will play a role. Currently, our software is not doing probably 100% job, and this is an area of improvement because notice, because Zach has a hard dependency that his task must start 4 days later. So we can, be smart about this and only allow the second task to be delayed, not the first task. Of course, there could be cyclic dependencies. In that case, there are hard, constraints that can't be met. Can't be met. In that case, Robin will have to probably pick up the phone and do some juggling of the task, as one project manager always does. And notice at the end of the day, the project, we also capture the response from the email as a comment. Now, this is essentially some of the areas where we have, incorporated AI underneath. It's powered by our object platform. And this platform is essentially powering not only the myTasks solution that we have built, we actually have built a couple of other solutions, using our, object store. It has an entire workflow manager that I talked about, and it has both, pre-commit and post-commit hooks. So in fact, some of the dependencies work that we do, we ourselves have decoupled services that are not only checking for policies and roles, but also doing this dependency checks, and through these post-commit checks, we can go out to various platforms, including email and chat. Here are some of the web services. These are used, this is a standard, we are using the latest state-of-the-art, web services methodologies. So this is using Swagger to show our service definitions. This is the service bridge, and these are our integration APIs. As I mentioned, some of this are using ourselves for dependency resolution. And we can also very easily define new schemas. Some of the things that Robin has asked, for example, when Seattle Inspection Department is checking, they return corrections, and she want to track these corrections as first-class objects together with tasks. We don't offer, corrections as an object out of the box, but it's very easy for us to actually add a custom schema. We can easily add, and this is using the latest GraphQL APIs, and you can easily define a new schema. You can actually register a schema, and you can also add data using the CRUD APIs that we offer, and you can actually do that using Swagger itself, and then use this is a standard Graph Explorer, GraphQL Explorer, and you can see the schema is created and the data can be easily iterated over. So that is essentially our project offering and our take on how AI can actually be applied to project management. Some of the other things that I have not talked about and we have not attempted yet is essentially things like, tracking project progress and being better at prediction, based upon the history of people who have worked on the project. So we can monitor, how the tasks are being done in the in the past, the original estimates versus changes and the number of changes that were made to a particular task duration, completion dates, and that could be resource specific, it could be overall project or sprint specific. There are also scope for automated document processing. There are a lot of things that are on documents that are sent over. Even in our, as I mentioned, those corrections, the corrections actually come back as PDF attachments, and we can parse those PDF attachments and extract individual corrections and relate them directly to a given task, or better yet, we can actually convert them to tasks, and all of that can be done through AI. We are already looking into those doing ourselves, and also will be looking to third parties to essentially take the power of our machine learning and automated document processing pipeline. We have a couple of demos in that space, and as part of my slide deck, I'll also include those demos. And bring that document processing into automation of the entire workflow when it comes to project management. Another area that we will be offering is essentially identification of duplicate work items or related work items. There is email messages, documents, chat messages, as well as tasks, and AI can play a very important role into identifying duplicates or related items as your project grows, as you have more items. It can be continually mining for those and suggesting, hey, these are the related items I found that you can easily look at, resolve. And essentially our overall goal and the goal of AI as we see it is going back to the point I made, that tools and processes are only a means to an end, not the end itself. So how we see AI is that the role of the AI is to make sure that the project management becomes a background means, and let the engineers be engineers, allow them to do their more work most productively as possible. Now it brings to my last slide. I know I've been talking fairly rapidly, but I wanted to make sure that we leave enough time for Q&A in the end. And this is my summary slide into my 30 plus years of career in building and releasing software, both successfully and unsuccessfully. We have some of the epic failures at Microsoft, and they are themselves are a big learning experiences. So first and foremost, as I mentioned, dog food, that is, use product by yourself, use with customers, do your pilot releases early, engage with the customers, sign up one or more customers who are willing to be your partner in crime, offer them all the freebies, all the support, because they are the ones who will provide you the real feedback, and they are the ones who will provide you, your blind spots. They will be the one who will be your guiding lights. Be the hub. When I talk about being the hub, project management is a profession by itself, but it is not an absolute profession on its own. I mean, in my eyes, you have to have subject matter expertise. You cannot be leading a team if you do not have your skin in the game. And even if you may not have the domain expertise, that is, you may not have a master's degree or PhD in software development or computer engineering or theoretical computer science, you could build or acquire the knowledge, and there are tools available today to do that. And one of those tools is precision questioning. I encourage you to look it up. There are courses available. There is plenty of material available online, and they essentially help you focus on how, what, why, and who for any given problem. Even if you do not know anything about it, you would be able to get there. And you would help, you would be able to ask the right questions and make sure your team members are actually providing you the right answers, and they'll help you, build the bridge as well as, build the rapport with your team. And as a part of being the hub also is you got to communicate, and it's not just communicating up, but you got to communicate down and across. That is, communicate with your peers, communicate with your team members, communicate with engineers, make sure everybody is aligned in terms of the deliverables that you're working on, both for the current sprint and your overall goal. Never lose focus on that. Anytime there is a bottleneck, make sure you can resolve that bottleneck, whether it's a design constraint, whether it's a new requirement that popped up, whether it's, someone is out sick, it doesn't matter, make sure that the right people are informed. When it comes to actually communicating, the best tool and the approach I've found it is let the data speak. It's not what you say, what your words are. It's actually what the data is. That is, what is the credibility in what you say, and how you bring credibility to your communication is, let the end user be your guide. If you want a feature in there, it's not your will. Show how many customers are asking for that feature. What is the real data that you have gathered? Have you done any surveys? What is the survey result reflect? Is there anecdotal data? Is it qualitative data? Bring that to the your argument. And if it's a competitive feature, show what the competition is doing. How many competitions are actually have that feature? Is that feature useful? Going back to that 80-20 rule, is it just a one of those me too feature, or is this something that customers really want and really use? Likewise, when it's internal issues, bring in the perf numbers, bring in the bug counts, bring in the pending work items, use all of that data, to build your argument. Lastly, to conclude, as a team leader, project management, your goal is to build consensus, build a team, and the tools you have is the shared vision, that MVP, the release goals, and the process that you using to build the iterative improvements. Keep that in mind, let the data speak, and that to me has been the recipe for success over the years. With that, I'll conclude my monologue, and hand it back to Dr. Pillai and the organizers to let them take it forward and open it for questions.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Naveen Garg, for this excellent presentation. We would open this for questions.
I see one hand.
Yeah, sir, Atul here. So, sir, can you just elaborate on that thing that you told, like from that NLP from which it reads the mail and automatically it transfers the task to the tree. So, what are the special keywords that we have to use in the mail, or how does it identify that actually?
That's a very good question. Yes. So this is actually in the field of AI. This is called intent mining. So we are actually not requiring users or people. In this case, Zach is actually, he is a tree service provider. Zach doesn't know that there are keywords that he must type. He simply, is focused on doing a task that is chopping a tree down. It's actually up to the software, the natural language processing, to be able to infer, what is the intent of the message. So going back to the keywords that you talked about, there are certain verbs. In case of project management, there is something called is a taxonomy or foxology. So in case of project management, things like project, project may have its own synonym. You may call it project. Somebody may call it, hey, this is like a workspace that I'm using, or this is the work order that I'm working on. So there may be different names for project itself. Then task, task could be a task for somebody. It could be an issue. It could be a bug. There is a, certain synonyms that are being used for tasks. And date, date is a very standard, it's a part of a schema when it comes to NLP. There is something called date. That could be either date or a time, or it could be, yeah, it's called PPT, people, places, and time. These are essentially certain nomenclature that is used in NLP for intent mining. And date is very easy, an integral part of that information extraction pipeline. And likewise, we have durations, so it's like 4 days, 3 days, So based upon that, when the text is mined using our software, and now it's actually in open domain as well, by the way. We are not alone. There are, Microsoft, Google, and even, a NumPy, or, the open source stack offers in many of these technologies in the space that you can use to apply natural language processing. And with that, you will parse the entire text, you will build a text corpus, and you'll apply the taxonomy to find these words, their frequencies, and mine those words and nearby values. And that's how you will actually discover these words and convert them to task specific values. So I will, restate that the user does not have to type any specific keywords. The user will type their emails as they type normal email using natural language. It'll be up to the AI engine underneath to do the mining of the language, build the corpus of the text, build a language model, and extract intent from that. It is not 100%, but it's getting very good.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It's mesmerizing, actually.
Great, yeah, for sure. There are some conversations on the chat. I'm just seeing. I don't know. Okay. Oh, that was about the noise.
Some more questions?
Anyone else? So can I clarify some points?
Please do, Dr. Pillai.
As the industry 4.0 is coming out, PM also is coming with PM 4.0. Okay. So here we are contemplating AI to be used in a big way in the scheduling. Not only in the software, in every project we want AI to come, because there are quite good number of activities are there when you talk about bigger projects. Then also the IoT plays a very important role, because all collaborative teams have to be formed, and they have to go through the project status, and then they have to report. So the IoT also plays a very important role. So in your projects, did you use any IoT thing of IoT for collaboration?
Good question, sir. The short answer would be no. And a more diplomatic answer would be, if I go back to our object platform, the one slide we had in which we showed a workflow engine and the fact that we have pre and post commit triggers. That is, any object that gets created in our system, before it gets created or updated, we trigger, a notification, and that notification can be actually serviced by not just one but multiple listeners. So all of those listeners can either allow or disallow that change from happening. So that's a pre-commit one. And similarly, we have a post-commit. Like for the email, for example, the fact is task got created. So that's a post-commit one. In that case, after the object is created, we send a notification, and there could be listeners on the notifications as well. They say, hey, a task got created. You may want to do something with it, right? So in both of those cases, we allow third parties to build services, and we actually have a service bridge. And in that service bridge today, we are only doing our own work, which is essentially security roles, authentication, you're making sure that only secure user can access that particular object, and also doing that dependency check, making sure that none of the dependencies are getting violated. And also we are doing the post commit triggers for emails and chat integration, so that we can do this notification sent out as an email, and incoming email can be parsed and converted into a task and fed back, into our system. And the same service bridge can be used for, as you mentioned, for the IoT. So we can bring in, number of third parties, that can come in and actually play a role here. We haven't done, and this is where, we'll actually be looking forward to a number of, solution developers, third parties. And there are actually, other service bridges that are becoming very popular. I think we mentioned ServiceNow. ServiceNow has done, integration to number of, third party solutions, whether it's salesforce.com, whether it's, ERP by SAP, or whether it's Oracle, or, Microsoft CRM, others, so yeah, so they, having a bridge. So if we were to write a bridge into ServiceNow, for example, we can automatically pick up, their integrations into third parties. Of course, they are probably, you have to pay for those integrations, but that's one route available. Or, if the team is, good in development, they can write themselves.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
There's one question from Mr. Nanda Kumar.
Yeah, Mr. Naveen, the AI, whether it is possible to use for predicting the overall time schedule in the projects?
It's a good question.
For example, the overall completion of the project, is it possible to predict using the AI?
That's a good question, sir. It's essentially extrapolating the schedule from, a given state. So there are two ways to do that. Today, actually, we do that in Excel. For example, you plot your milestones and you see your bug curve. I mean, we used to do that all the time at Microsoft. You look at your bug trends, and based upon your bug trends, you can extrapolate, that you're fixed. Let's say, there are 100 bugs in the product, and you're fixing, 10 bugs a day on average. That means it'll take you at least 10 days. And then you factor in how many new bugs are actually being generated every day, and you factor that in. So you basically find the delta between the bugs being found, bugs being fixed, and based upon that, you extrapolate and you predict. So we did that even before the AI was there. But we
Yeah,
were horrible.
exactly.
Yeah, we were horribly wrong, because the thing is, we did not take into account the team's ability to fix bugs at a predictable rate, so we only
Exactly,
could, extrapolate in a straight line using Excel and maybe apply some, heuristics there. But with AI, what comes into play is, now, we can actually look back, as I was mentioning, each individual person's record in the past, number of
capability or
times
performance.
their task, got delayed, number of times they had to be revised, and then, you can use that metric across each resource to come up with a much better model, to predict the completion of a product or a particular project, taking into account the past history of the team, of the individuals and the project. And you can also look up, similar projects done by other teams if that data is available. So all of those factors come into play, comes to AI.
Definitely. And usually we use the simulation. What we try to do that is, while the project is first formulated, we run the simulation runs, right? Depending on the nature of project, like, you used to design the number of simulations to run, and, find out what is the criticality index and try to focus on that and these kind of things. But is it all something of the similar concept is also being built in with AI as its embedded methods?
So we have not done, I guess, much investigation in that space. Something that we are doing, I think, okay. I mentioned dependency resolution. So, for example, we are not looking at the project overall to do simulation, but we are actually applying constraints. So we have a constraint solver, which is actually going to have, similar, looking for cyclic dependencies within, for example, an R project. So, for example, Robin, in this particular scenario that I said, Robin can go ahead and set up dependencies across various projects. Hey, excavation can happen only after tree is removed, or a structural engineer can only do structural once the architectural drawings are done. Or, by the way, I need to get permit done by this particular date. So she can set all these dependencies, and then she doesn't realize that some of these dependencies are unsolvable. Because the fact is there are hard constraints that she has put, and they are conflicting with each other. So as a part of our constraint resolver, we can flag those constraints, and that is, we will do that. The AI will come into play that I briefly touched upon is how it can actually help Robin resolve those constraints automatically. You know,
Sure.
yeah, because currently, it'll be up to Robin to go back, manually move things around, knowing which one is a hard constraint, which one is, soft constraint, and move them around. But AI can be actually, a great tool here, where it can automatically try to come up with the, this is essentially a constraint solver problem, come up with a
Sure.
much better, resolution that takes into, all of these factors in place. So that is something we'll do. But going back to project simulation, we are not planning to do, overall project simulation ourselves. But
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Naveen. Yeah. Thanks.
sure. Thank you.
Shivakumar has got a question. Shivakumar.
Yes. Commander Shivakumar?
Yeah, I'm here. I just had some comments which I've put in the chat box. I think I'm certainly excited
Just
about what you presented, and I relate to most of what you said. I mean, we find it very difficult. I mean, as project managers, the overheads what we incur. I mean, the engineer wants to do his job. He is not really interested in maintaining the project management documents. Of course, documentation has been a weakness in our culture. Right? In Indian culture, it's a very big weakness. I think nobody wants to document anything. So I think I will certainly forward to. I think I would be. I've used many tools, but then all of them finally boil down to what you call when the time pressure is there. When you have to finish a project in time, I think we really dump all of them and then just get behind the work. I mean, what's to be achieved. I think.
True. I mean, trust me, I have worked at Microsoft, so it's no different. The thing is, it's about, a culture, even our product, for example, from day one, we have a very small, we have, young college graduates who started working with us here in India itself, they did not know what test cases, it's a shortcoming of, I think, our engineering colleges, in engineering, you learn about coding. There's a great emphasis on coding, but there is minimal emphasis or other knowledge impart on what actually it means to build a product. There has to be a product development course where we talk about the value of all of these principle when it comes to software design lifecycle. That you must write clear specifications. You must get them reviewed. You must write your design documents. You must write your functional test, and you should write test cases. What are test cases? What are boundary conditions? What is black box testing? What is things like we do threat security threat analysis. There are so many tools that are out there. Unfortunately, the engineering courses that our universities are producing out there, there is no emphasis on all of those things, whereas this is what really is needed when it comes to software development or other software that is reliable, robust, I mean, essentially applying robust engineering processes from day one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. I think there are no more questions. We've come to the close of the session. And thank you once again, Mr. Naveen, for the excellent presentation and the AI integration. It's been really an eye-opener, AI integration into this workflow for projects, software engineering projects, and how you're addressing communication challenges and scheduling, and how you're estimating the timelines and working on dependencies and the MVP aspect that you spoke about. So I think really an eye-opener, something really new and emerging. So thanks for the excellent presentation and for sharing your time.
So I would like to
please.
thank before you conclude. There's a lot of response coming to us from the software companies on the agile project leadership. So which you touched upon the agile, and we are also now changing ourselves from a conventional sense of project management to talk more on the agile project leadership. So that is why I think you have covered few points on that, which is definitely very useful to our teams, and we are very thankful to you. for giving your experience and with the examples you explained very well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So he can conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Dar and Dr. Pillai.
Thank you, sir. We now conclude the session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to all the participants. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it was a very useful
Yeah,
session.
thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Yeah,